Hello, Mr. John Kirksick. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Jessica Carolus, and we are with Medicare Mapped. You can find us at Facebook. That's the fastest way for now. And today's question is a little bit scary. Can Medicare take your house? Mr. John.
Yeah, so thanks for coming. I know this is our first time doing it. We've been in the business now for decades, it feels like, right, Jess?
For sure.
And I kind of have to rant. I always have a rant in me. There's always a need to rant. As we start this subject, I first got to start with, and Jess, I was on the phone today with IRS for about 2.5 hours. Yeah. So I got a letter saying, hey, you owe us this amount of money. And I thought that was interesting because I actually had paid my taxes last year and had paid my taxes this year. So I wasn't quite sure where the money was coming from. So after 2.5 hours of sitting on the phone, I found out that my business was supposed to file taxes by March 31st last year, even though we had
an extension.
Yeah, even though we had the extension for us individually, it did not apply to me as a business owner, right?
Yes.
So I thought that was very interesting that now that they wanted money as a penalty for my filing in July instead of filing in March. So that was a bit of a
Love the IRS.
Right? And so, I mean, it'll kind of segue into how we're talking about Medicare and our houses. But here's what's interesting. And I actually had an opportunity to talk to my mother, who is obviously a senior citizen, as there's a lot of gray on my face. But I'm quickly approaching the age of being able to get my senior discount, but I still have a few years left for that. But anyway, the interesting thing is the person that was on the phone with me said, do you have any comments to make on this as far as what you would like us to do? And I said, well, yeah, I thought that I had an extension based upon COVID. Yeah. And because I wasn't talking to my CPA or anybody else, right? I just didn't realize that. And she goes, oh, you want a hardship letter? And I go, yes, that's exactly what I want. She goes, great, give me 5 minutes. And she came back on and said, Mr. Kirksick, your debt has been forgiven you.
When does that ever happen?
I know, right? Hello.
Only Jesus.
In public, I'm probably going to have to say thanks, IRS, right now. I don't know how that happened. But, a lot of times it's not only getting the right person, but knowing how to, ask the right question in the way that they were wanting it. And I kind of had to pick up on it. It wasn't something she just simply said, we can give you an extension, we can give you an exception letter and we can do away with this debt. It was something that I kind of had to key in on what she was asking me for. So when we talk about Medicare and our houses, there's an interesting thing that goes on with that. And that is Medicare is not going to take your house. That's the first thing we can say. Medicare is not going to take your house. Yeah, right? Now, saying that, we're going to open up a can of worms. Because
seems appropriate.
Yeah, over the course of time, I've learned that typically we're talking about long-term care. And on our Facebook post, we've recently talked about that. Were you not amazed at the amount of people that actually need long-term care?
Oh, that's something you take to the bank. You just plan on it, and you plan accordingly.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it really happens. I now looking back, I don't remember the exact statistic, but I think it was like 3.7 years for a female and like 2.2 years that a male would need it. Whether that's that's due to Alzheimer's or other things, that seems to be something that we're living longer, and because of that, this is happening, right? We don't. A lot of the seniors are like, just plant me underneath the tree and put some petunias on me, but that it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. And so long-term care is really the reason that people are asking this question, is because of that. And, I have several family members that are in that situation. And I don't know if you've had this in your life, but they're starting to say, if I get to a point that I am a burden, please put me into a long-term care facility. Right?
Yeah.
And that is just a topic. Like I said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it with my mother. I don't want to talk about it with me, but it's a hard, realistic fact that there is a chance you're going to need to be in a long-term care facility.
Right.
And that's where people really start to ask the question about, is Medicare going to take my house? It's not typically with a doctor's, like a hospital stay or a chronic condition they may have. It's that situation that's causing them to ask that question. That's a pretty broad stroke, but that's what happens with it.
So how do you plan, besides grabbing a long-term care plan,
Right.
making sure you're prepared for the future in that regard? How do you mitigate the risk that's inevitably coming your way? Which really, stats are pretty clear that risk is coming your way. The end.
Right. I think the number was like 69 or 68% of Americans were going to have that, right? And again, that was, numbers we were giving as we were having this conversation on our Facebook, page, which is Medicare Mapped, right? So if you ever want to go back and look at these, that's where we're kind of starting these conversations. So there's several ways to mitigate that potential loss. And it really is going to come down to your family situation. Typically, people look to Medicaid to cover this loss. And I got to ask, Jess, do you think most people understand the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, or should I take a second kind of go over that?
It's always worthwhile to go over because it's always a little bit confusing.
So a lot of people say, well, they'll say, well, I'm on Medicaid or I'm on Medicare, and they really don't understand the difference. And it's a fairly simple concept. Medicare is for those over 65 or those that have been disabled. So Medicare is typically for, as I like to say, the old, right? Medicaid aid is for those that are in a financial need. So that can be anybody from birth till death. Medicare is sponsored or funded through the federal government. Medicaid is a state-ran program. So it's not always called Medicaid. And it's not always ran the same way based upon the state that you live in. So as we talk to people, this has a lot of movable parts to it.
For sure.
Yeah, right. But typically what people will say is, and again, as we start this, know this, Jess, I have stories that I'm probably going to share, quite often as we go. Some stories are my own personal stories from people that I've come in contact with. Others are stories that have been shared with me throughout the decade and a half that I've been doing this type of work now. And some stories, you may go, gosh, that's my story. I've had people go, that's the person you're talking about. I'm like, no, but they're similar, right? And so please know that the stories I tell aren't necessarily aimed at just one individual, even though it may fit your story. That's not necessarily just your story.
Right.
And so as we talk about this, there's couples that literally bankrupt themselves to be ready to go into long-term care.
That's really unfortunate because you spend so much time working. Well, your whole life you spend working to prepare for retirement, and then all of a sudden to find out you got to lose everything or the Fed will take it on your behalf.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, remember again, and this is where it's so hard. What if you had Alzheimer's or dementia and your quality of life was, you wouldn't remember what you owned. You wouldn't remember those things. So, I've had people, and I kind of would maybe be this way myself. I'm going to take every moment that I remember and I'm going to enjoy those moments now.
Oh, seriously.
So it's a whole new topic that comes when we talk about these things, and they're touchy situations and topics, and they're not easy. It definitely is an elephant in the room or a Band-Aid that has to be ripped off. So each situation is a little different, and each person is going to feel differently about that situation. You're right. If I have an inheritance to leave to my children, or I have a large, sum of money. One of the comments I made that you loved was, I'm going to Costa Rica, right?
You got to make some arrangements. Costa Rica sounds way better than the alternative, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, and long-term care policies are becoming more and more difficult to obtain.
Why is that the case? Is it for health reasons? What's the situation?
Well, the cost to be in those facilities is astronomical, right? We can be talking 50, 60,000 easy in a year, right? And so now it gets to a state of, how long are they going to be there? Like, how long are you really going to live? I mean, I've had family members that they've said that they're going to die. In fact, I had a really good friend that he would often say, well, fellers, it's good to know you, but I'm probably not going to be here next week. And a young man that was visiting this gentleman with me one day said, I think you've been saying that for the last 10 years.
I'm making plans.
Right. So for the insurance companies, that can be a quite
a hefty expense.
Yeah, and I don't know if they could actually figure out how to make that actuarially work. Obviously, they haven't, or they would still be selling those policies.
Sure.
So it's gotten to a point that the insurance companies don't feel, that could be a profitable product.
They're losing money.
Or they would still be offering it, right?
Sure.
So, and the other thing that goes on, Jess, that I think is interesting is long-term care to me is like dental insurance. And I hate to put it that way, but I'm going to explain why.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my teeth are hurting, and that's when I think I need dental insurance.
Right.
I know that my health is declining, and I'm probably going to be in a long-term care facility. So they're not insurances that we typically like to pay on for an extended amount of time, because we just don't know. I mean, I really don't know if I'm going to use a long-term care.
Sure.
Maybe I'll be lucky, and as a gentleman said, I'll just go to the other side, But that's just such a tough question to say, how do we do that? So let me give you some thoughts on it. First of all, I would first say an attorney is going to need to be involved.
Sure. And that's if you're going down the path of unloading your assets, right?
Correct. I mean, I would probably go ahead as a senior citizen and still be looking at these things, because you're going to need to have some ideas of what happens in that case. Even if you haven't truly prepared for it, typically you need to have things figured out 5 years before. That's kind of the laws on it, is it needs to be 5 years ahead of when you need it. So
what's magical about 5? Is that just what the Fed has said? 5 is
the
number?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. There's basically been some different cases brought towards the Supreme Court and stuff, and that's kind of the magical number that they talk about now. And I don't know why 5 was it. I know 3 was played with for a while. I think, if you're asking me, I think the reason that it is because that's just a good number for them to see you're not trying to unload something immediately upon finding out your health is declining, right? So 5 years. Sense. Yeah. So 5 years is kind of the magical number. And you have to decide what's best for your situation and how you feel about things. So, but I would get an attorney involved. You at least should have a will. And that's why I say that. And then you probably need to look at some trust if you have assets. So a trust would definitely be something to look at. The more that you can move away from ownership of things, the better off you are in this long-term care scenario, unfortunately.
Well, it as painful as it is, at least there are some solutions. You may have to be a little bit ahead of the game in terms of making sure the timing works, but at least there is some option.
So what if you weren't?
Can help.
What if you weren't ahead of the game?
it seems like you might have a bad time of it.
Yeah, there's really, and this is the hardest one to explain to everyone
Right.
because you have lived a lifetime. If you are married, this is where married really hurts, right? If your spouse is already, deceased, or if you never did get married, then you've got some different things happening. But if you're married, and that is a majority of the seniors that we meet, not everyone, but a majority, the kind of the punt, the Hail Mary, maybe I'd say Hail Mary because that's probably more along the lines of what it is. And they hate when I say it. They hate it. But here it is.
Tuesday.
Anybody that I mention this to, are you ready?
I'm ready.
The Hail Mary, the go-to play is called divorce.
Oh, wait a second. Why? Okay, explain. Okay, explain that Hail Mary. Explain. Okay,
I just
I'm
love seeing
all
your
for
face,
like
right?
work in the system, but that's like a pretty extensive work of the system. So why does that work of the system work? Why does it exist?
Yeah. Again, this is where a lawyer is advantageous, right? Because I've been on the insurance side of things, not on the
Legal.
lawyer side, like the legal side of things, right? But I can tell you this, that it works on the premise of previous cases that have been fought. And
Gotcha.
basically what they have come down to is they've said, if you get divorced, one of the two partners can take possession of home, auto, and half of any finances that are in investment. So now the other one just has to deal with half of any investments they have to pay for long-term care before the state would start to contribute.
That's a really, really unfortunate solve.
I did start with hell
You
and
did.
then followed it with a Mary,
You
right?
did. I heard Hail Mary for sure. And
Yeah,
I can see that might be the situation.
yeah, yeah. And again, I almost get a little teary-eyed because even though I'm just starting into my 50s, my wife and I have had those kind of conversations because of the work I do, where I say, I know that you love me, and I know that no piece of paper is going to change that.
Sure.
So if we get to a situation that is unpredicted, that is unprecedented, and something happens much sooner than either of us had anticipated, and that's what's necessary, sign the paper. Don't leave yourself destitute in trying to maintain our marriage. But that is a hard conversation to have.
That seems like really the Hail Mary. That's your last straw.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep.
So let's recap then. So best case scenario, you grab a long-term care plan. That's best case scenario.
If you can, yes, I would, yes.
Which I realize you can't buy those plans generally until you're in your 50s. So people need to be aware that's not something you buy young, like life insurance, and it's less expensive. Correct. The second thing is you liquidate your assets roughly 5 years in advance of some sort of long-term care need, correct?
Correct.
And barring things go totally sideways, we're getting a divorce, we're splitting the assets and making sure that something gets retained by the other spouse.
Correct.
Fair statement?
Correct.
So best case scenario, then you've done some planning to make sure that you're protected. And in any case, though, it short of buying a long-term care plan, it all sounds incredibly vulnerable to me. But the thing, I guess, that is our point to the answer to our question is Medicare will not take your house. No, but Medicaid can.
Correct. It can't come through the state. Yep.
So you need to just make sure you've done your best to prepare for the future.
Correct. So now remember, Medicaid. No, and you do well. Remember, Medicaid is state by state. So this is a really hard question to say. What does each state,
What do they do?
What do they do, right?
Yeah.
When they talk about that being an asset, asset recovery is what they call it, right? And they can do it. But you also have, what if you have a disabled child in the house? I mean, there are so many other,
Factors.
nuances with this.
Yeah.
That's why I started with saying, if you can get an attorney involved, and let's go with that. My wonderful clock's going on behind us. I don't know how well you can hear my clock.
I can hear it. That means time is up.
So, yeah, thanks so much. Again, if you have additional questions, I'm sure we'll be having more conversations on this topic.
Yes. And find us right now at Medicare Mapped on Facebook. Come and join us.
Yep.
Thanks,
Have a great
John.
day, everyone. Yep. Thanks again. Bye.